The Cincinnati Reds hired a bunch of coaches and instituted a different approach to coaching hitting than they did last year. We'll look at what the Reds are doing with their hitting coach situation, and we'll look at a few new members for the Cincinnati Reds Hall of Fame, all on today's Locked On Reds.
You are Locked On Reds, your daily Cincinnati Reds podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Reds. Thanks for making Locked On Reds your first listen of the day. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, and we are free and available on all podcasting platforms. I'm your host, Stephen Offenbaker, alongside Jeff Carr, and we have a passion for baseball. We have a passion for the Cincinnati Reds, and we have taken that passion and we have turned it into information for you. On today's podcast, Jeff and I are going to tell you about the new hires that the Cincinnati Reds announced today on the coaching staff. We'll tell you who's good, who maybe is not good, and where we think some upgrades occurred. We're also going to tell you about a couple of names that were announced today as additions to the Cincinnati Reds Hall of Fame. A couple guys will be joining friend of the podcast, Bronson Arroyo, as the newest members of the Cincinnati Reds Hall of Fame. But Jeff, let's start with the coaching hires because, it's some news coming out. The Reds have done some things that on the surface, okay, it's a coaching change. But if you dig a little bit deeper with these hires, I think that it really lends itself to the narrative that's developed over the last several years with how the Reds have been trying to overhaul the coaching staff and the way that they do things and incorporating analytics while not losing the traditional baseball guys. You know, we talked to Chris Welsh about this a couple times, where the Reds are seeking to find balance. And I think some of these hires that they announced are in fact trying to walk that rope, walk that line of balance between analytics and good old baseball guys.
Yeah, and really the biggest news of all these coaching hires, there were a number of different ones about like first base coach and things like that you're just kind of like, okay, sure, that's fine. Obviously, the biggest needle mover is Joel McKeithen, who is hired as hitting coach. And actually, Joel McKeithen is a couple of years younger than I am. He's a 31-year-old hitting coach. His first job as a hitting coach, he spent only 1 year in the organization. He was an assistant last year, got promoted this year, and he will be the head of almost a hitting board of directors, if you would. It's him and two other guys. They hired Terry Bradshaw. So they got I don't
know about hiring Pittsburgh Steelers to help these guys play baseball.
Look, at least the Reds now have more Super Bowl rings than any other major league franchise. No, I'm just kidding. That's not that Terry Bradshaw. He actually spent
That's the low hanging fruit, Jeff. Where it's right there. You have to at least make one Bradshaw joke, right?
It's easy. We're getting late into the week here, so it's like, yeah, whatever. But no, he spent multiple years as the Royals hitting coach. Actually, was let go from that job in May of last season, but he will be an assistant along with Joel McKeithen, and then also Tim Lamont is going to be another assistant hitting coach. He's going to focus more on the analytical side. So they're trying to build maybe a chorus of hitting coaches to kind of look at all angles where improvement at the plate is concerned.
Yeah, and I like that you call these guys the board of directors of hitting. That's pretty interesting. They need to like get that put on their coffee mugs in their office or something. That's actually pretty good stuff there, Jeffrey. Here you go. Once again, free ideas to the Cincinnati Reds right here on the Locked On Reds podcast. But here's what I like about it. I like the fact that you've got in these guys some old school baseball knowledge. You've got somebody that's fairly dedicated to incorporating the analytics, and then you've got a guy that's in charge of overseeing it all to help move it forward. You know, at the major league level, you're not teaching guys to hit anymore. You're helping them to maximize their tools, and you're helping them to utilize all of the things that are available to them. So in having somebody that's dedicated more to the analytics side, you're doing that. And having somebody that's a little bit more old school that can help hitters adjust on the fly, not teaching them how to hit, not teaching them how to be major leaguers. They've got that covered. They're professionals. But every once in a while, you get stuck in a rut. And you need somebody with a second set of eyes to help you break out of it. And, this is one of the big things we talked about with Aristides Aquino, Jeff. He was never willing to listen to this kind of stuff. And ultimately, it wound him up in Japan. These guys are brought to the team not to teach hitting. They're just to help process information and make necessary adjustments. So I like the way the Reds have kind of built this out with the hitting board of directors.
It's kind of like, I almost think of it too as like a golf driver for those of you that love to golf. There's some drivers nowadays where you can kind of like tweak a bolt in the driver and make the face more of a draw or more of a fade. By the way, that doesn't fix a slice. I've tried. But that's the point. They're not there to teach them to hit. They're there to tweak it just a little bit. How can you make it just a little bit better? Take something good and make it great. That's what these guys are for. And Nick Crawley even said that. He said having a 3-coach hitting system allows us to have different perspective. And it's interesting, too, to note, Steve, in that the two guys that they brought in to join McKeithen in Bradshaw and Lamont, they both have extensive experience with hitting. I mentioned Bradshaw with the Royals, but also Lamont. He was the New York Mets hitting coordinator last season, and after spending 3 seasons as a minor league hitting coach in the Houston Astros organization. So you're getting some guys, Bradshaw having been an actual hitting coach, and then Lamont having experience in successful organizations, and they were replacing, so obviously Alan Zinter out, and then Rolando Velez was an assistant hitting coach last year. His background was in pitching. So yeah, they're at least getting guys in the right spots now. So that's good.
Yeah. And, and I like McKeithen for a variety of reasons. But one of the things that really jumps out to me is, he's really just part of a baseball family. This is a family that knows baseball and that eats, breathes, dreams about baseball. His younger brother Tim is on the coaching staff for the Pittsburgh Pirates, and he's got another brother Aaron that's a catcher in the St. Louis system. So these are guys that they pedigree. Are all about this sport. And I think you need guys like that around. You need guys around that love this game and that have a vested interest in moving this game forward. And I think McKeithen fits that bill for sure.
And really the other thing, because there were a number of other guys that were hired to different roles that we're not really going to see as fans, we're just not going to see their effect very much. Although, you do have a new first base coach coming in and things like that. But Jeff Pickler has moved. He was the outfield coach and the advanced scouting coach last year. He is now the infield coach, taking over for what Delino DeShields was doing. It's interesting, too, speaking of guys out of position, he was the outfield coach last year. He played second base when he was a player. So, yes, he's in the right spot, too. So, seeing the Reds getting these dudes in the right spot it's what we're looking for here. Their new first base coach, by the way, is Colin Cowgill, which he was a AA manager, so he's got some experience with the coaching thing there. But overall, it's about getting the right guys.
Didn't he just recently retire? Wasn't he?
Colin Cowgill?
Wasn't he a player?
He was the past 2 seasons he was a AA manager. And
I think he's only 3 years out of the game. I think this is another really young guy. I need to go look him up more, but I think he's recently retired.
This will be interesting too, Steve, because he was the AA manager in the Seattle Mariners organization. So
of course he was.
There's going to be some dudes coming up that are like, "Oh, hey, I know you."
Right?
Man, the Reds and the Mariners, name a more dynamic duo. I'll wait.
I'm telling you, it's Cincinnati Reds West and Cincinnati Reds East is what we've got going here.
It really is. But
Cowgill retired in 2016. He
go.
played from 2011 to 2016. So yeah, he's another one of these young guys, which I really like. I like. It really helps bring in this new thought processes. I'm not necessarily saying that having the Dusty Bakers of the world still around is a bad thing. They bring a lot to the table as well. But I like that the Reds have embraced the blending. when I talked to Chris about this, and I can't remember if it was for one of our episodes or if it was his last interview over at Reds Alert, but he talked about the fact that when the Reds went out and got Kyle Bodie, they overcorrected what the problem was, which they went from completely old school and just, I'm doing everything by the way my gut tells me I need to do it, and then went all the way over here with Kyle Bodie carrying his laptop around the practice field or whatever. And then when that didn't quite work out, they adjusted kind of back to the middle. And I think that's the sweet spot for bringing in the old way and the new ways and getting maximum production. So I really like the way this is going. And, I know I'm going to get like the Reds suck. You're a homer. Why are you saying nice things about them stuff? But I mean, this is the way you do it. You have to modernize the organization. And these are the kind of moves that make small incremental changes to modernize the organization and get this team that is never going to stop telling you that it's poor and small market to be competitive, because they're going to have to do that differently.
And I look forward to seeing the effects on the roster this year. But I say this, Steve, the Reds added 2 more names to the Hall of Fame induction list this year who are going to join Bronson Arroyo. And one of them is the team's all-time saves leader. Danny Graves brings up an interesting take that both of us share about a particular statistic. That's coming up next. But first, today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline remains your number one source for all your sports wagering information and the kind of stuff that's going to give you a great bet. BetOnline.net has you covered for Major League Baseball. They've got great futures. I was just looking the other day, Steve, and I'll bring you back in here, about Jacob deGrom. He's actually favored to go to the Braves. I'm pretty sure Mets fans wouldn't like that very much. However, there are also reports that the Tampa Bay Rays contacted him, and they're not even on the list. So where do you think Jacob deGrom's going to end up?
First off, I think the Rays contacting him would be like if the Reds had contacted him. Phone call. Hey, how you doing?
How's the family? How you doing?
Jacob says, no. And well, thanks for your time. That's how that conversation probably went. Listen, I like these odds. I mean, it's interesting to me that, we're talking about the Rangers. We're talking about, a team that, I mean, listen, the Rangers invested like $500 million in player salary over the next 10 years and have nothing to show for it. So for them to double down and go spend some more money and just really keep growing it out, I think that'd be an interesting move. Obviously the Yankees and the Dodgers are in play for everything. I think it's going to be the San Diego Padres, Jeff. They are still tired of being the redheaded stepchild of the National League West. And I think they are all in on doing whatever it takes to pass the Dodgers. And signing deGrom, that's just another thing they can do to get past the Dodgers. So I think it's going to be the Padres.
And that would be the great equalizer, I would think, when the Giants sign Aaron Judge. So I find that interesting. I think he's going to be a Ranger. I just think that the Rangers are going to go all in. And BetOnline accordingly has them as the second favorite. So you have the Braves at plus 150. You got the Rangers at plus 350. You have the Padres down a little bit at plus 750. So a little bit of a value there. But I could definitely see your side of the story as well. And if you want to check out all sides of the story for your next bet, head on over to betonline.net. You can go there on your mobile device today or on your desktop and check out all of the different articles, all the different podcasts, everything that they've got about your next great bet. That's BetOnline. It's where the game starts. Thanks again for making Locked On Reds your first listen today. Tomorrow, we are going to come at you. There's an early preview of the Zips projections. This is something that Dan Szymborski does every year over at Fangraphs. He predicts the WAR, the wins above replacement for each position on the field for each team. And we're going to see just how low the Reds can go, because it's not looking really good on the early projections as of this moment, Steve. But I'll tell you what, let's not focus on the future for right now. Let's look back as the Reds have, at two guys that they're adding to the Reds Hall of Fame induction list. They're going to join Bronson Arroyo this summer. That's going to be July. I was looking at this. July 15th and 16th is the induction weekend for the Reds Hall of Fame. And I tell you, and the two guys, Danny Graves is added, and also former general manager Gabe Paul, who we'll get to here in a few minutes, are going to join Bronson Arroyo on the Reds Hall of Fame stage. But good for Danny Graves. The save stat, which is the reason that he got inducted, is blah.
You will show some respect to the baby-faced assassin. You hear me, Jeffrey? No, listen, I agree with you. The save stat is a invention.
It was created for relief pitchers to get paid. That's what it was.
It's a free agent invention. That's exactly what I was going to say. It was, a metric to be used for, guys to get paid. There's some guys that made a whole career out of it that, became a ridiculous unanimous induction into the Hall of Fame for being a good reliever. It happens, not taking anything away from Mariano Rivera, but I mean, right. It's just overrated. I just don't know how else to say it. And when you're talking about Danny Graves, now look, Danny Graves was a just fine pitcher. He is the Reds all-time saves leader, as you mentioned, with 182 saves. He appeared in 465 games for the Reds, started 30 games. People forget that, I think. Started 30 games for the Reds, 182 saves, 733 innings pitched. And this is here's what tells me that the saves thing is just a little extra, because if you break down his numbers and you look at his Ks and walks, he struck out 388 guys. He walked 239. So he was not coming out of the bullpen and blowing guys' doors off. He just simply wasn't doing it. But I have a question for you, Jeff.
Okay.
Because, it's just, looking through the stats line to do this segment. How many in his career, how many complete games does Danny Graves have as a member of the Cincinnati Reds? And of those complete games, how many of them were complete game shutouts?
He started 30. What? Okay, so you're asking me. So this number has to be somewhat surprising. I think, honestly, if I'm thinking of Danny Graves as a starting pitcher, any amount of complete games is surprising. So I'm going to say, and I'm only guessing on the surprising fact, not because I actually believe this, 5 complete games and 2 complete game shutouts.
Okay, well, you give him a little bit more credit than he has. 50% of his complete games were actually shutouts. He threw 2 complete games in his career, and it kind of jumped out to me that he had 2, because, I figure a guy can stumble his way into 1. Like, somebody that's not, he can stumble his way into 1. Danny Graves had 2, and one of those was a complete game shutout. Looking for a little surprising nuggets in the stats line, and that kind of jumped out at me that he had a complete game more than once.
Especially because, like you mentioned, it's like, oh, people forget he was a starter. People want to forget that he was a starter because that was a failed experiment. He was not good as a starting pitcher.
Oh, Danny Graves is not coming on this show now. I told you to be nice. I told you to be nice in this segment. Jesus.
I think he would. No, it's great to see him getting into the Hall of Fame here, and it does sound like we're really just trying to crap on this. And sorry about that. That's not really meant to be the case. But I think the save stat, I want to know more about a pitcher other than the save stat. Mariano Rivera, outside of the save stat, was an amazing pitcher. Like the K to walk ratio, his ability to limit base runners in total, whether you're talking hits or walks, was just phenomenal. I don't know that we really need to celebrate saves, and I think that we have started to move away from celebrating saves as much. You're seeing relief pitchers who pitch at different points in the game be valued more. Guys are getting better contracts. I think of Andrew Miller, at least before he fell off a cliff and performance-wise and different things like that. So I think that overall we're moving past the understanding that the save made a pitcher great. There's much more to pitching than just being the guy to get the last out of the game.
Right. I mean, clearly you have to be a saves guy pitching in New York with a phenomenal entrance music. So I know, does that sound like anybody we know right now? Like maybe there's another guy brewing up there in New York, Mr.
Flushing
Diaz
Queens,
and
yes.
his trumpets. But you know, I said this off air, and I'll say it now to just get backlash in the comment section. This induction, this Danny Graves induction, and this saves thing. You know, we talked about it. Saves is a created stat. It was invented in the free agent era to get the relievers paid. But there is a segment of the Reds fan base that embraces this
segment
stat
of baseball
because,
fans.
they grew up on this stat. You know, the Rolaids Fireman of the Year award. You know, it was that guy, and it was pushed. It was pushed by Major League Baseball. It was pushed by the agents. It was pushed by the players. You know, there's a whole segment, a whole generation that believes in this number, and I get it. And so when you have that many people in your fan base that still kind of embrace this topic, it only just makes sense to take your franchise's all-time saves leader and put him in the Reds Hall of Fame. Now, I think it's unfair that they're putting him in with Bronson Arroyo, because if you compare and contrast those two pitchers, you know, Bronson Arroyo is a much more significant pitcher in Reds history and has contributed much more to the Reds' success than Danny Graves did. So, I mean, I think the Reds Hall of Fame should have saved Danny Graves for a year when they're like, guys, we got no one. What are we going to do? We need, what do we got? And then we're like, hey, saves leader, Danny Graves, get him in here. You know, I would have done it then.
And give him a lot of credit, too, because he's got 2 all-star appearances. He has a year where he had 41 saves, the year that they stopped the whole starting pitching experiment, and he went back into the bullpen. He's actually pretty good there in 2004. But just overall, I look at Danny Graves' career, and I said it's built on the save statistic, which I think baseball has moved past now. Like, I think we all know that David Bell knows Alexis Diaz is his most important reliever. That does not mean he has to pitch in the 9th inning.
That is absolutely correct. All right. He's not the only guy, Danny Graves, going into the Reds Hall of Fame with our friend Bronson. The Reds also added Gabe Paul to the Reds Hall of Fame. And coming up, we're going to tell you who he is, because there's probably a lot of you that don't know. And we'll tell you what his accomplishments were as a member of the Cincinnati Reds organization. We've got that coming up right after this. You can follow the podcast on all platforms, including YouTube. If this is your first time watching us on YouTube, thanks for being here. Click subscribe. Click the notification bell. That way you never miss an episode that we post, and you get notified every time we go live. The lives are a fun event over here on YouTube. The comment section is just blowing up more and more and more every time we go live. I love it. It's my favorite part of doing the lives, that interaction with you guys. So click that notification bell, because I want to hear from you like we're hearing from everybody else. It is a good time. In between episodes, you can follow us on Twitter. You can follow me at @SOffenbaker with 2 Fs. You can follow Jeff at Jeff Carr, and that's with 3 Fs, because spelling has always been very hard for him. You can also follow the show at Locked On Reds. There's no Fs in that. I remind Jeff every day. Jeff, there's a third guy, and I didn't make any Alabama jokes, so I need you to recognize that while I'm picking on you, I save the Alabama jokes for later. Gabe Paul. Who the heck is Gabe Paul? He's a member of the Reds Hall of Fame.
Well, I'll tell you this, Steve. I was kind of confounded when I heard the name as well, but there's a reason for that. He was the guy just before really the Big Red Machine even got going. He was the general manager for the Reds in the 50s and into early 60s. And there were actually a few big moments that happened in Reds history under his watch. Gabe Paul, starting off in one of the most important things in baseball history as a whole, he presided over the Reds' integration of baseball in 1954 when the Reds added Chuck Harmon and Nino Escalera to the team. So we always understand and know that Chuck Harmon was one of the first guys to break the color barrier as a Cincinnati Red, and the general manager that presided over that was Gabe Paul. So, you know, as much as the movie 42 celebrates Branch Rickey, that, you know, Gabe Paul is the Reds' version of Branch Rickey in this story.
Well, Gabe Paul did a couple things. You know, one of the big things that I think we should give him credit for is, you know, he was responsible for bringing in Frank Robinson.
Yes.
And he was also responsible for keeping Frank Robinson from going to teams like the Yankees. The Yankees tried to get Robinson for a lot of years, and Gabe Paul was the guy that kept that from happening. Now, I'm trying to look and see if he was still with the team when they traded Frank Robinson to the Orioles. I'm not finding it readily here. I'm not sure if he's the guy that traded him away, but I'll give him credit for being the guy that brought him in. That's for sure.
I think he was out the door whenever that happened. He also brought in a couple other notable guys, a guy named Tony Perez, Leo Cardenas, Pete Rose, Gus Bell, Jim Maloney, and Jim O'Toole. So there's, good chunk of the Big Red Machine there that Gabe Paul was responsible for bringing to Cincinnati. And more than that, too, he was also able to get the Reds focused on cultivating talent overseas. He really looked at Latin America, and under his direction, they established an affiliate agreement with the Havana Sugar Kings over there in Cuba. And I know that it wasn't a super long agreement, but to think that back in the day they had a Cuban minor league affiliate, that's pretty cool to see. Of course, there was a couple of things in history that made that superfluous.
Well, and true. I think it'd be fair to label Gabe Paul as a progressive of his time. He was doing things that nobody else was doing yet, and embracing things that baseball, the establishment, was still fighting tooth and nail to not embrace. So, I think just those things alone make him a great inclusion into the Reds Hall of Fame. Did you know that the Reds Hall of Fame was established in 1958, Jeff?
I did not know that.
You know who was in charge in 1958? When the Reds Hall of Fame was Gabe Paul. He's basically the guy that helped found the Reds Hall of Fame. So,
the guy that started the thing is finally in the thing.
He's just a natural inclusion into the Reds Hall of Fame. And I was chuckling while you were talking because I hadn't read all of the show notes. And the next show note here
got a little something in there.
I'm just going to let you take that one away because it cracked me up.
So Steve, obviously, Gabe Paul, general manager of the Reds. He's now the fourth general manager in Reds history to be elected to the Reds Hall of Fame. Jim Bowden is not one of them.
Shocking. I'm waiting for Cam to announce that they're opening a leather pants display with like some original music written by Cam Miller to play in the background. Maybe some
like
archival footage of like
or something. Yeah.
Some archival footage of like four guys helping pull Jim Bowden into the leather pants, powder being dumped in.
Can we do like a CGI that scene in Friends whenever Ross is trying to get his leather pants back on in the bathroom? Maybe like CGI Jim Bowden's face onto Ross. Like I think that could work.
Perfect. I listen. I will buy a Hall of Fame membership if they do that, just to support the project.
Yes, support it. But hey, speaking of the Hall of Fame, the founder or one of the founding guys, the guy who was the general manager of the team whenever it was founded, Gabe Paul, finally going into the Hall of Fame. He's joining Danny Graves and Bronson Arroyo. The three will be inducted on the weekend of July 15th and 16th, coming up this next season. But you know what, Steve? I think, reminding people that Jim Bowden is not in the Reds Hall of Fame is a great spot to end today's podcast. Thank you, everyone, so much for watching.
He's not coming on the show either. What are you doing? What are you doing today?
Today's episode of the Locked On Reds podcast. He wasn't going to come on here anyway. Tomorrow, we're going to talk about some early Zips projections, and we're going to try and make it as much fun as we've had here today. The numbers are kind of low, though. So we'll get into that on tomorrow's episode as we take a look at what Dan Szymborski sees in this Reds roster. Thanks so much for checking us out today. Now go check out the Locked On Sports Today podcast as the biggest games, the biggest news, game recaps. You're talking about everything that's going on in the world of sports will be coming to your ears and your eyes in 22 minutes or less. And that's all on the Locked On Sports Today podcast. It's just like Locked On Reds. It's free and available on all platforms. Steve, we know who's going into the Reds Hall of Fame, and we know who's not in the Reds Hall of Fame. And the Reds offseason is going on, and we got Reds Fest coming up here this weekend. What's that all mean for you and me?
Well, that means that for you and me, we are going to be at Reds Fest on Saturday. Come say hi if you are there. It means we're going to continue to watch the transactions, the rumors, the news to keep you updated on all of it. And it means that Jeff Carr is going to be creating the For the Love of Leather Pants GoFundMe to get that CGI work done at the Reds Hall of Fame so that we can support Jim Bowden. We're also going to be working hard to keep you locked on Reds every single day.
Leather pants.